A kid's splash pad, playground, and walking trail are not what a lot of people would expect to find when they visit the Oklahoma Territorial Plaza in Perkins. The plaza is primarily dedicated to preserving the community's historic buildings. Things like Frank Pistol Pete Eaton's home. However, the Plaza Trust quickly learned grants to pay for historic preservation work are few and far between, while grants for things like splash pads are much easier to obtain. Katie Friddle is the executive director of Preservation Oklahoma. We talked to her via Skype.
There really are not a great deal of outlets of funding specifically for preservation. Everybody kind of assumes that each preservation project they see is funded by a grant, and that is generally not the case.
The Plaza Trust quickly learned it had to think outside the box to find funding resources for preservation work. For instance, it was able to use some of the money from the Splash Pad grant to pay for restoration work on one of its historic buildings.
There are a number of other funding sources that are not specifically for preservation through things like community development block grants, things like USDA rural development, other kind of federal sources of money that can and often are used for preservation projects, but they're not what people always come up with when they, Google preservation funding.
David Sasser is chairman of the Oklahoma Territorial Plaza Trust.
By being able to incorporate the pavilions and the playground and the kids' splash pad, it's drawing families, especially young families here, and as those kids are playing and doing things, they go, hey, let's go look at Pistol Pete's house, or let's go look at the barn. And I think it gets them interested in history and their grandparents interested in telling stories and becoming docents and helping with what we're doing here.
Friddle says her organization is always on the lookout for communities around the country that have found creative ways to finance preservation projects.
They've been really creative in Iowa in using a number of different funding sources that had typically gone to things like putting in sidewalks or a new sewer line, and using them for preservation and downtown revitalization projects.
Friddle says Preservation Oklahoma, USDA Rural Development, and the Oklahoma Department of Commerce are excellent resources for groups that need help finding grants they may not be aware could be used for preservation work. For ONR, I'm Kathy Tatum.